While Trump wants to start talks on Iran nuclear deal he wrecked in 2018, United States President Donald Trump said in a television interview that he has written to Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei saying, I hope you're going to negotiate on Iran's nuclear program because if we have to go in militarily, it's going to be a terrible thing for them. Almost a decade ago, the five permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, Germany, the European Union, and Iran signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, commonly known as the Iran Nuclear Deal, which lifted Western sanctions on Iran in return for Tehran severely limiting the scope of its nuclear plan. Iran agreed to not enrich its uranium beyond 3.67%, a level suitable for peaceful nuclear power applications but not for weapons production, and signed a roadmap agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency. Trump wrecked the agreement, a signature policy achievement of the Barack Obama presidency, during his first term, withdrawing from the deal in 2018. Trump's withdrawal from the JCPOA, which he described as one of the worst and most one-sided transactions. Trump wrecked the agreement, a signature policy achievement of the Barack Obama presidency during his first term, withdrawing from the deal in 2018. Trump's withdrawal from the JCPOA, which he described as the one of the worst and most one-sided transactions for the US. Was part of his broader dismantling of his predecessor's policies. He targeted the terms of the deal, not the deal itself, and asserted that he was a better deal maker than Obama. Trump also justified his decision based on the deal's alleged failure to curb Iran's ballistic missile and the lack of checks on Iran's regional proxies, the two aspects that were crucial to Saudi and Israeli opposition to the JCPOA. Trump's withdrawal from the JCPOA, which he described as one of the worst most one-sided transactions for the US, was part of his broader dismantling from his predecessor's policies. He targeted the terms of the deal, not the deal itself, and asserted that he was a better deal maker than Obama. Trump also justified his decision based on the deal's alleged failure to curtail Iran's ballistic missile program and the lack of checks on Iran's regional proxies, two aspects that were central to Saudi and Israeli opposition to the JCPOA. But the withdrawal met with international backlash. The IAEA said that Iran was complying with JCPOA linked restrictions and the UNSC Resolution 2231, and the Europeans continued their commitment to the deal. As new American sanctions hit Iran's energy, petrochemical, and financial sectors. In 2018, the EU enforced a blocking statute to Europe to protect European companies doing legitimate business in Iran. But with Trump's maximum pressure policy leading to at least 1,500 different sanctions on crucial Iranian entities between 2018 and 2021, European efforts failed to prevent companies from abandoning trade and investment in Iran across sectors. By 2019, Iran began a significant rollback of its commitments even though it formally remained in the deal. Technically, the JCPOA remains in force through October 2025, but the European failure to lobby a US re-entry, new American sanctions, and Iran's incremental rollback of its commitment in response has led to progressive weakening of the deal. As new American sanctions hit Iran's energy, petrochemicals, and financial sectors. The EU enforced a blocking statute to protect European companies doing legitimate business in Iran. Technically, the JCPOA remains in force through October 2025, but the European failure to lobby a US re-entry, new American sanctions, and Iran's incremental rollback of its commitment in response has led to progressive weakening of the deal. In 2021, Joe Biden administration began indirect negotiations with Iran in Vienna, but despite coming closer than ever in 2022, according to Tehran's then top nuclear negotiator Al-Bagheri, a decisive outcome remained out of reach. Meanwhile, Iran's resistance economy crumbled, the rial went into free fall against the US dollar, and popular disaffection in the street was inflamed by other triggers such as the death of Mahsa Amini in September 2022 in the custody of the morality police. Parallelly, Tehran ramped up its nuclear activity, the perceived threat for Israel, furthering the push towards nuclearization. Iran's top nuclear scientist and reputed weapons program chief, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, was assassinated near Tehran in 2020. The following year, Tehran announced 61% enrichment, framing it as a response to the alleged Israeli attack on its Natanz nuclear facility. This, along with Iranian support for Russia's Ukraine war in Ukraine, meant that by 2023, negotiations were all but stalled. Since the conflict in Gaza began in late 2023, the IAEA has repeatedly warned of a severe lack of transparency and Iran's continued production of a near weapons grade uranium. Indeed, Iran's possible closeness to nuclear weaponization necessitated the regional lobbying for de-escalation during the two rounds of Israel-Iran rocket exchanges in 2024, even as it catalyzed Israeli lobbying for a broader war against Iran. So, what has triggered the apparent change in Iran US dynamics now? Late last year, Iran conceded its economy was in crisis. President Masoud Pezeshkian said Iran faced very dire imbalances in gas, electricity, energy, water, money, and environment. This tight situation is likely the principal incentive to seek an engagement with the US. Ayatollah Khamenei reports recent reference to some bullying governments who insist on negotiations not to resolve issues but to impose. Notwithstanding, over the past months, Iran has continued to outreach to Washington through third party facilitated back channels as well as overt publications, policy statements, and declarations by Iran officials calling for engagement and relief from sanctions. But despite Iran's economic difficulties and recent Israeli military success, including the killings of Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah and Ismail Haniyeh of Hamas, Tehran's ability to wield influence through its proxies remains significant. The Houthis of Yemen, especially, retain the ability to choke global trade passing through Gulf of Aden and attack Arab energy infrastructure. The deepening rapprochement between Iran and Gulf Arab states, driven in no small measure by shared animus against Israel, means the Middle East is now a radically different place from what the Trump dealt with in his first term when Saudi-Iran tensions were soaring. It is in this context that Trump's commitment about Iran must be seen. A favorable response from Tehran could cushion fresh American concessions to Israel on the Palestinian question, as the Trump administration engages in unprecedented direct talks with Hamas on the release of American hostage, bypassing the Israelis mitigating the Iranian nuclear risk would be significant policy achievement. A favorable response from Tehran could cushion fresh American concessions to Israel on Palestinian question. And as the Trump administration engages in unprecedented direct talks with Hamas on the release of American hostages, bypassing Israelis, mitigating the Iranian nuclear risk would be a significant policy achievement. All this said, there remains a strong trust deficit between the US and Iran, where both conservatives and reformists blame Trump personally for the collapse of 2015 deal. Last year, Iran conceded its economy was in crisis. President Pezeshkian said Iran faced very dire imbalances in gas, electricity, energy, water, money, and environment. The tight situation is likely the principal incentive to seek an engagement with US. Over the past months, Iran has continued its outreach to Washington through third-party facilitated back channels, but despite Iran's economic difficulties and recent military success, including the killings of Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah and Ismail Haniyeh of Hamas, Tehran's ability to wield influence through its proxies remains significant. Houthis of Yemen especially retain the ability to choke global trade through Gulf of Aden and attack Arab energy infrastructure. The deepening rapprochement between Iran and Gulf Arab states, driven in no small measure by shared animus against Israel, means the Middle East is now a radically different place from what Trump dealt with in his first term. Trump's withdrawal from the JCPO, which he described as one of the worst and one-sided transactions, was part of his broader dismantling of his predecessor's policies. He targeted the terms of the deal, not the deal itself, and asserted that he was a better deal maker than Obama. Trump also justifies his decision based on the deal, alleged failure to curtail Iran's ballistic missile program and lack of checks on Iran's regional proxies as two aspects that were central to Saudi and Israel opposition to the JCPOA. But the withdrawal met with international backlash. The IAEA said that Iran was complying with JCPOA linked restrictions and the UNSC Resolution 2231, and Europeans continued commitment to the deal. As new American sanctions hit Iran's energy, petrochemical, and financial sectors in 2018, the EU enforced a blocking statute to protect European companies doing legitimate business in Iran, but with Trump's maximum pressure policy leading to at least 1,500 different sanctions on crucial Iranian entities between 2018 and 2021, European efforts failed to prevent companies from abandoning trade and investment in Iran across sectors. By 2019, Iran began a significant rollback of its commitment, even though it formally remained in the deal. The number of overweight and obese people in India are on the rise, including children and adolescents. Reversing this trend requires action on multiple fronts. 44 crore people in India may become obese by 2050. Obesity is the root cause of many diseases. Numbers people mentioned come from a set of studies recently published in the journal Lancet. There were nearly 211 crore overweight people in the world in 2021. It accounted 45% of the global population. Around half of the overweight and obese adults live in 8 countries: China, India, US, Brazil, Russia, Mexico. Adults with a BMI of greater than 30 were considered obese, and those with a BMI 25 and 30 overweight. For children and young adults between 5 and 17, the researchers considered weights for age and gender recommendations for International Obesity Task Force. Changes in the definition to create the categories of clinical obesity and preclinical obesity. For making a diagnosis, doctors have to look at least two of the four body size parameters: BMI, waist circumference, BMI, waist circumference, waist to hip ratio, and waist to height ratio, while also checking for other symptoms associated with obesity such as breathlessness, wheezing, sleep apnea, etc. These changes were introduced to more accurately capture the problem of obesity. A person with BMI less than 30 may still have lot of abdominal fat and thus face obesity related complications. The number of overweight and obese people are on the rise in India, and this will continue till at least 2050, by which time India may even overtake China in certain categories. Of uttermost concern is the number of obese children, which might grow up to obese adults. With the global prevalence of obesity in children and adolescents having increased by 244% in the past 30 years and having a forecasted increase of 121% in next 30 years, trends in adult obesity prevalence are unlikely to abate. The rapid increase in obesity among children and adults increases the risk of early onset in several lifestyle diseases. Obesity also increases the risk of infections and severe disease, resulting in higher healthcare spending. One study citing the example of COVID-19. One of the key drivers of obesity epidemic is the shift towards consuming calorie-dense foods high in sugar, salt, and fats, according to the study. The studies reported that in countries with high prevalence of obesity, traditional local food supply systems have been replaced by big food distribution that provides high-calorie foods with long shelf life. Concerningly, multinational food and beverage corporations are shifting their investments from high-income to low and middle-income countries where populations and per capita incomes are growing and regulation is lax. Coordinated action is required to maintain local agricultural patterns and traditional food preparations. There is a need to invest in clinical management and treatment of obesity and related lifestyle conditions in countries where the obesity epidemic is already at its peak. There is a need to study intervention strategies in low income conditions. Hantavirus, the rodent borne virus that killed pianist Betsy Arakawa, wife of actor Gene Hackman. Hantavirus is a family of rodent-borne viruses that can cause serious illnesses, even deaths. Infected rodents spread the virus through their urine, feces, and saliva, according to US CDC. The specifics of the virus and the disease it causes depends on the region and rodent host that carries it. HPS is epidemic to Western Hemisphere, where the most common hantavirus strain causing the disease is carried by deer mouse. Flu-like symptoms present 1 to 8 weeks after exposure. Why and how and why the Apex Court limited the power of arrest under GST Customs Act. The Supreme Court last month curtailed the power of officers making arrest under Customs Act 1962 and Central Goods and Services Act 2017. The court in Radhika Agrawal versus Union of India ruled that powers exercised by custom officers under these acts are analogous to the powers of arrest, search, and seizure exercised by the police. That is, they are subject to the same restrictions and procedural standards that apply to the police under the Code of Criminal Procedure 1973. Among other things, these procedural standards include the right of an arrestee to be presented before the magistrate within 24 hours of her arrest, the obligation of an official to inform a friend or family member of the arrestee, and the right of an arrestee to have an advocate present in the vicinity of in vicinity during an interrogation. The recent ruling comes as part of the Supreme Court's ongoing effort to limit the broad powers of prosecuting agencies under stringent laws such as Prevention of Money Laundering Act 2002, the Apex Court last year in Arvind Kejriwal versus Directorate of Enforcement laid down requirements for the ED to legally arrest someone under PMLA. In Radhika Agrawal, the court effectively transplanted these requirements to arrest being made under the Custom and CGST Acts. Both the Custom and CGST Acts classify specific offences as being cognizable for which arrest can be made without a warrant from the magistrate. Section 104 Clause 4 of the Customs Act, for instance, classifies serious offences such as evading customs duty of over 50 lakh to be cognizable. But this does not mean that agencies have unfettered power to make arrest in such cases, as the Supreme Court held in Kejriwal. While granting bail to the former Delhi Chief Minister, court made several observations regarding ED's power of arrest under Section 19 of PMLA. We have cautioned in Arvind Kejriwal how unbridled exercise of the power to arrest without a warrant can result in arbitrariness and errors in decision-making process. A similar error made by customs officer can lead to frustration of the constitutional and statutory rights of the arrestee. The requirements under Section 19 of PMLA material in possession. The court in Kejriwal held that arrest can only take place when evidence in an officer's possession enables them to form an opinion by recording reasons in writing that the arrestee is guilty. The court said that all the material must be considered before making an arrest and that an officer cannot ignore evidence that exonerates the arrestee. In Radhika Agrawal, the Supreme Court applied this ruling to state that custom officers must also have material in possession and cannot conclude that an offence has been committed out of thin air or mere suspicion. Reason to believe. The Supreme Court in Kejriwal held the officer must record in writing the reasons to believe that an arrestee is guilty based on the material in their possession. While the court can examine the merits of these reasons, if they see they are clearly connected to the case material, the court held. While the Customs and the CGST Acts do not contain a requirement to record reasons, the Supreme Court held this was implicit. The providing grounds of arrest, the court in Kejriwal held that grounds of arrest must be provided to the arrestee so that she can challenge the arrest or apply for bail in court. Without the information, the court said an arrestee would be on a back foot. The court reiterated this position in Radhika Agrawal. Officer must record in writing their reason to believe that an arrestee is guilty based on the material in their possession. Material in possession, reason to believe, and providing grounds of arrest. Misuse of power in arrest. The court refused to strike down the power of arrest for the CGST and Customs Act officials as sought by the petitioners. However, it did consider data on number of CGST offence cases that have been instituted since 2017 and the amount recovered and number of arrests made to hold that there is some force in the petitioner's submission that the SSCs are compelled to pay tax as a condition for not being arrested. Supreme Court ruled that it was illegal for tax officials to coerce someone into paying overdue taxes by threatening to arrest them. To curb such cases, it held that individuals who were so threatened or coerced would be entitled to move the courts and seek a refund of tax deposited by them. The department would also take appropriate action against the officers in such cases. The Apex Court also directed CBIT and Customs to form guidelines to ensure that no taxpayers are threatened with arrest. This refers to the editorial widen the frame. It appears Tamil Nadu CM has developed an uncanny penchant for opposing all that the BJP-led NDA government does in exercise of its constitutional mandate. First, he opposed NEP's three-language formula on the specious ground that it was a facade to impose Hindi in the south. He has now changed track and continues to fire salvos against the government's move for delimitation and again on the flimsy ground that it would put sparsely populated southern states like Tamil Nadu at a disadvantage in terms of number of seats in parliament. He seeks a freeze on delimitation for another 30 years. Lok Sabha seats were already frozen earlier by the 84th Amendment Act until 2026, and it is now time to conduct a fresh census to recalibrate parliamentary and assembly seats in accordance with the law. This is an unwarranted interference by a state in the exclusive prerogative of the Union government disguised as an onslaught on federalism and should be rejected. This refers to the editorial widen the frame. The key question is why is the proposed delimitation exercise post 2026 becoming so contentious compared to the 1952, 1962, and 1972 delimitations? If the number of MPs is based on population, the the relative imbalance between states will remain even after 30 years, notwithstanding Southern CMs advising people to have more children. Studies have shown that low TFR cannot be reversed. One can't blame Tamil Nadu CM Stalin if he is capitalizing on delimitation for next assembly election. BJP's assertion of dominance through its language policies, use of central agencies, and appointment of governors who hold up important bills even when the BJP is heading coalition government at the center has led to growing concerns in the south about what could happen in the case of super majority after delimitation. This refers to editorial movement to party students who started an uprising to oust the then Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina have formed the Jatiya Nagrik Party promising to bring political reforms. Neither Khalida Zia's PNP nor Sheikh Hasina's Awami League governed in a fair and just manner. No alliance with Jamaat-e-Islami is planned. The party has a tough road ahead to establish a firm footing. Their mission to reshape the polity may be achievable if they work towards unity, justice, and progressive, inclusive politics for the prosperity of the people of Bangladesh. Economy in a search of a roadmap. With structural transformation stalling, private investment cycle yet to take off, and upward mobility restricted, Modi 3.0 has its work cut out. Both Modi 1.0 and Modi 2.0 has clear strategies to deal with economic challenges of the time. Whether they succeeded in resolving the issues facing the country is another matter now. The question almost 1 year into this government's third term is what is Modi 3.0's economic strategy? Modi 1.0 began by placing paramount importance on ensuring macroeconomic stability. The lessons from the UPA's mismanagement of the economy has been internalized during the final years of the UPA second term. The economy had lost momentum while inflation soared. The centre's fiscal health had also deteriorated sharply as it stepped up its support to the economy during the global financial crisis and thereafter. And while the deficit did decline later, it remained elevated alongside as savings fell without commensurate fall in investments. The current account deficit also widened significantly, raising concerns about overfinancing. There were also worry that banks were masking the true extent of the bad loans in the system. Investor sentiment was also hit by the issue of retrospective taxation. And the rupee came under pressure during the infamous taper tantrum when India, along with Brazil, Indonesia, South Africa, and Turkey, was dubbed as one of the fragile five. Modi 1.0 began by addressing these issues in the Union Budget 2014-15. Finance Minister Arun Jaitley committed to bringing a policy framework that would result in higher growth, lower inflation, sustained level of external balance, sector balance. Budget unveiled a roadmap to lower the deficit to 3%. By 2016-17, it spoke of ushering in a modern monetary policy framework, which resulted in putting in place an inflation targeting framework. It also sought to allay investor concern, committing to provide a stable and predictable taxation regime. During this term, government ushered in reforms such as IBC and GST. It even tried to push through the contentious land acquisition bill. Along the central bank took steps to clean up bank balance sheets. Modi 2.0 began with the realization that despite the steps it had taken in the first term, growth wasn't picking up. The private investments continued to languish. Hoping to spur investments in September 2019, the government cut the corporate tax to 22% and lowered the tax for new firms making fresh investment to 15%. In months thereafter, it also launched the production linked incentive scheme to further incentivize firms to invest in a range of sectors, and alongside, the government also increased capital expenditure quite sharply in this term, hoping that it would crowd in private sector investments. Modi 2.0 had also had the difficult task of managing the economic fallout of the pandemic. It launched a host of measures to support the economy, including the emergency steps such as provision of free food, cash transfers, and credit for small and medium-sized firms. As a result, its debt deficits rose sharply and, despite consolidation in recent years, remain well above the levels prescribed by the Finance Commission. But despite the steps taken during both Modi 1.0 and Modi 2.0, the continuing weakness in the economy was apparent. The pain points were clear. One of the structural transformation of the economy had stalled. One, the structural transformation of the economy had stalled rather than exiting agriculture. More workers were entering the sector. Two, the private investment cycle had not taken off despite the use of all fiscal levers. Three, goods export had stalled while services exports held steady. This had implications for employment. Fourth, job crisis, especially among the less skilled, was evident. Millions more were now self-employed. Fifth, real wages for large sections of the labor force had barely registered a rise. This impacted household consumption. Sixth, the combination of limited job creation and subdued wages meant the upward mobility was further restricted. The pain points were clear. One, the structural transformation of the economy had stalled. Rather than exiting agriculture, more workers were entering the sector. Two, private investment cycle had not taken off despite the use of all fiscal levers. Three, goods export had stalled while services export held steady, and this had implications for employment. For the job crisis, especially among the less skilled, was evident. Millions more were now self-employed. Fifth, real wages for large sections of the labor force had barely registered a rise. They impacted household consumption. This impacted household consumption. Sixth, the combination of limited job creation and subdued wages meant that the upward mobility was further restricted. Modi 3.0 took charge against this backdrop, but two budgets later, there is still no clear articulation of a strategy to address the issues plaguing the economy. Nor is there a clear roadmap of how the country will transition to a upper middle income status and then to the high income category over the next 2 decades. There is little mention of the PLI scheme and considerable skepticism on the extent to which the income tax cuts can boost economic activity. Based on the pronouncement so far, there appear to be two broad areas that could be focus of Modi 3.0. One is trade, where the government is hoping to stitch up agreements with the US, EU, and UK. However, as these talks have been going on for some time, the question is whether the agreements could be finally clinched. Another area is deregulation. Economic Survey had talked it about in great detail. The budget followed up by proposing to set up a high-level committee for regulatory reforms to enhance ease of doing business. Deregulation is, however, not just an India-specific theme. In the US, Donald Trump has established the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, to streamline government, with Elon Musk vowing to slash federal regulations. Employees across agencies have already been fired. In the EU, the Draghi report on the competitiveness talks in detail about regulatory burden facing companies, especially smaller firms, and how to reduce it. In Argentina, Javier Milei has taken a chainsaw to the government and signed a decree to reduce the number of ministries from 19 to 9, as per the Cato Institute. Between December 20 2023 and December 7, 2024, there have been 672 regulatory reforms in the country. In Vietnam, the parliament recently approved a plan for radically rehauling the government. As per the reports, 5 ministries are being abolished, the bureaucracy is being radically streamlined, and thousands of jobs are being cut as the government pursues ambitious growth targets. In comparison, in India, the high level committee is expected to make recommendations within a year. The idiom from Greek mythology between Scylla and Charybdis best represents Bangladesh's current political landscape. As the country continues to grapple with lawlessness, violence, and tanking economy, Mob seems to feel empowered and continue to flout the law. Banned Islamist organizations like Hizb Hizb ut Tahrir (HUT) are openly demonstrating on the streets, joined by other radical Islamists in defiance of the security authorities. A student leader of the agitation and an advisor to Muhammad Yunus, who heads the interim government, is known to be the member of HUT. This advisor had hit the peak of nationalist rhetoric when he tweeted about annexing parts of West Bengal and other states in India's northeast. Meanwhile, the student leaders have launched a new political party, hoping to take advantage of the fluid political situation. One of the leaders of the student agitation resigned from interim government to become the convener of a new party named Jatiya Nagrik Party, National Citizens Party. Their declared mission is to adopt a new constitution and build a firewall against constitutional autocracy. Their promise to reshape the political framework of governance and build a new Bangladesh is yet another spike in political rhetoric. Yunus had reportedly played a role in promoting this party. History is his witness to such parties born out of turmoil, failing to make the grade. Yunus lacks popular support. He has no experience in leading a national government, but is known to have nurtured political ambitions. After being awarded the Nobel Prize in 2006 and 2007 under the army-backed caretaker government, he flouted a political party, Nagrik Shakti, hoping to induct honest politicians and reform Bangladesh's political culture. Party wound up after it failed to receive much support. As India's High Commissioner from 2007 to 2010, I had to engage with the army-backed caretaker government. I met Yunus a few times and quizzed him about his political party. He was convinced that Bangladesh needed a new honest political culture, which the corrupt mainstream politics parties were incapable of providing. As the head of the interim government, Yunus has failed to curb violence. In fact, he has been criticized for justifying the violence as legitimate, for rationalizing violence against minorities as political and not communal. His detractors also blame him for giving a free hand to Islamists to capture institutions and ousting appointees to the Hasina government. The economic situation has increased the frustration among the people who are struggling with rising living costs. Hundreds of factories have been closed because of the violence, investments have dried up, credit volume has declined, and employment has shrunk. The promised dividend of the so-called People Revolution and a new liberation touted by the Yunus-led interim government has fizzled out. People's Party is running out. In an unprecedented public statement, the army chief warned that infighting and the violence had to stop as it posed a threat to the country's sovereignty. His remarks came after the demolition of the Mujib's house, a historic landmark in Dhaka. The interim government failed to stop the bulldozer, and Yunus again seemed to justify the anger that led to the outrageous act. The army chief also ominously said that later no one should say that he did not warn them. He had supported the holding of early elections, which directly challenges the desire of student leaders who want to retain power for an extended period of time to consolidate their position and chalk out a plan for their participation in the election. Student leaders have pegged their position on the argument that reforms in the electoral system and governance will require time. The army is worried about its image and the perception that it has become ineffective at a time when the country is facing several challenges. A variety of domestic and international pressures have had their impact, and Yunus had announced that elections will be held between December 25 and March 26, 17 to 20 months after Hasina's downfall. Yet there is no definitive roadmap with dates. Procrastination seems to be the preferred policy option. Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, a close friend of Yunus, has made public his concern about the turmoil in Bangladesh. His family's origins are in East Bengal, and he maintains a soft corner for Bangladesh. Sen believes that Yunus is trying his best but has warned against any action to ban the Awami League. The student leaders had wanted to ban the Awami League, blaming it for all the ills that had struck Bangladesh. The real purpose, however, was to remove the oldest and strongest political party from electoral politics to ease their path to power. The opposition to such a policy from important domestic institutions and political parties ensured that it did not fructify. Rhetoric has failed to overcome reality. It is clear that neither the Awami League nor the Bangladesh Nationalist Party will enter into any coalition arrangement with the NCP. The BNP and several political parties have come out strongly in support of an early election, which has challenged the Yunus regime's vacillation. In contrast, the JEI and Hizafat-e-Islam have clearly indicated their reluctance towards early elections and have advocated local elections to be held first. Ideologically, the radical outfits are focused on their agenda to make Bangladesh a Sharia-compliant Islamic state. For neighbors, Bangladesh is a major issue for its neighborhood policy. Bilateral ties have gone downhill because of unwarranted rhetoric from interim government catalyzed by India's support of the Hasina government. Hatred and rhetoric cannot replace the reality of geopolitics and geoeconomics. The Yunus-led regime has climbed down from a rhetoric height to a more realistic level. It's not clear if Trump's assumption of office in the US has changed America's equation with Bangladesh. There is rising anger in Bangladesh over India cutting the number of visas issued to Bangladeshis. This anger is being directed at interim government. Thousands of Bangladeshis travel to India for medical treatment and tourism. Financial pressure is mounting regarding the upkeep of over a million Rohingya refugees, as the UN has halved its food aid to Rohingyas. While both UNES and foreign advisor have voiced support for good relations with India, they have also upgraded ties with Pakistan. Islamists in Bangladesh have earned to embrace their long lost brother Pakistan. China has been avidly wooing the interim government and the JEI. What Jamaat Islami, right? Indicating its perception of which the way political wind is blowing and its policy of containing India. The ongoing challenges of India's neighborhood policy are not new, but have implications for India's security. Bangladesh should be careful about crossing red lines. Rough weather, unsteady ship. In Maharashtra, scandals and dismal state finances will test Mahayuti's navigation skills. India and America first. Delhi is better prepared than many to engage with Trump's America based on give and take. In his remark in London last week, External Affairs Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar suggested that US President Donald Trump's America First policy is something Delhi could work with. At the root of Jaishankar's optimism is the fact that under Trump, America's focus on self interest rather than the pursuit of global leadership, although India's post independence elites fully shared the values of liberal internationalism. They were never comfortable with Washington's claim to be the self appointed champion, representing a newly sovereign state with a strong commitment to choose its own path. The Indian elites rejected the idea of the US acting as the judge of other nations, assessing their democratic credentials and punishing them for deviating from the presumed standards of liberal internationalism. If the Indian left was traditionally the most vocal in denouncing American meddling in the affairs of other nations, today it is the right that makes the case most loudly. Delhi, which was unsettled by the Biden administration's support to anti Modi groups in India and its support for ousting Sheikh Hasina from power in Dhaka, it is pleased that Trump is not looking to use American power to promote internal change in other societies. India also welcomes Trump's departure from the idea of a unipolar world dominated by the US to a recognition that today there are many consequential powers constituting so-called multipolar world that Delhi has long preferred. Washington's allies in Europe and Asia have long relied on the US for their security and are shocked by the Trump's demand that either they contribute more to collective defense or forego American protectionism. This India's strategic partnership with the US, in contrast, is not one-sided but based on shared interest. As a non-ally with independent foreign policy, Delhi is much better prepared to engage with America first based on give and take. For India, transactional engagement with America comes amid Trump's plan to rearrange the global order. What Trump and his team have in mind is nothing short of restructuring modern capitalism that emerged out of the 1929 global economic crisis and remaking the post-war international system led by the US. There is a strategic premium on getting this right for major countries like India. Delhi has begun the engagement with Trump on a sensible note, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to the White House last month. At the core of new understandings between Modi and Trump is the agreement to negotiate a free trade treaty, but negotiations with Trump administration are not pretty. Delhi will have to hold its nerve and focus on securing its interest and avoid being detracted by the comments at the highest level in Washington. The prickly egotism of Indian political class, the temptation to sacrifice national interest in the name of ideology, and the tendency to posture rather than seek concrete outcomes and external negotiations are handles that need to be sidestepped. The Modi government's capacity to turn the Trump challenge into an opportunity to revitalize India's trade policy, a long overdue task, will significantly improve if it takes the Indian public into confidence on the trade negotiations with the US and make political case for the new relationship with America. Gaining wider currency as strategic reserve signals a shift in how US views cryptocurrencies, calls for reassessment by others. In 2019, Donald Trump wrote on social media platform that he was not a fan of Bitcoin and other currencies which are not money and whose value is not highly volatile and based out of thin air. However, thereafter Trump has reversed his position. In 2024, he promised to appoint crypto-friendly regulators and make the US the crypto capital of the planet. Days ahead of his inauguration, he launched a meme coin called Dollar Trump. Last week, he went a step further. President signed an executive order to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and a U.S. digital asset stockpile. Strategic Bitcoin reserve, and U.S. digital asset stockpile. And on Friday, the White House hosted a crypto summit. As per the executive order, the reserve will be capitalized with Bitcoin possessed by the Treasury Department forfeited as part of criminal and civil asset forfeiture proceedings. Other government agencies will also evaluate their legal authority to shift Bitcoin to static reserve. There has, however, not been a complete audit of the US government's Bitcoin holdings, which are spread across various agencies. As per David Sachs, the White House AI and crypto czar, the US government owns about 2 lakh Bitcoin. The executive order raises several questions. It says that the Bitcoin deposited will not be sold, so what purpose will it serve? Strategic reserves are created by countries. For instance, the US has a petroleum reserve, while Canada has one for maple syrup. As per the executive order, reserve will be capitalized with Bitcoin possessed by the Treasury Department, forfeited on part of as part of criminal and civil asset forfeiture proceedings. Other government agencies will also evaluate the legal authority to shift Bitcoin to strategic reserve. Therefore, there has, however, not been a complete audit of the US government's Bitcoin holdings, which are spread across various agencies. As per David Sachs, the White House AI and crypto czar, the US government owns about 2 lakh Bitcoin. The executive order raises several questions. It says the Bitcoin deposited will not be sold. So, what purpose will it serve? Strategic reserves are created by countries. For instance, US has a petroleum reserve, while Canada has one for maple syrup. So, as to be able to intervene during the times of need, in order to smoothen out market imbalances, the executive order also states that the government will not acquire additional assets for the stockpile and that any further additions to the reserve will be budget neutral. This implies that as of now, there will not be a new large buyer in the market. However, if that changes, the US government could become a major player with the ability to influence prices. But if not, will future additions will be limited to the Bitcoin that are forfeited? And what about the four other coins that Trump mentioned would be included in the stockpile? A US strategic reserve does, however, signal a major change in how Washington views cryptocurrencies, and with more countries ushering a regulatory framework given the borderless nature of such assets, it will be difficult to have a regulatory stance that is an outlier. A more carefully considered approach is thus required. In this regard, recent reports that the Indian government is re-examining its discussion paper on cryptocurrencies are welcome. Navigating this increasingly complex and rapidly growing area requires regulatory clarity and coherence and the institutional mechanisms that safeguard the interest of investors and ensure the integrity of markets. Emerging alliance of global right-wing forces has disdain for democratic norms. More than a century ago, Vladimir Lenin described imperialism as the highest state of capitalism, an outcome of latter's decay. His analysis stands the test of time when we see a crisis ridden capitalist order which has failed to improve lives globally. Consolidation of right wing and far right political forces globally was accompanied by blaming regulations and diverting the popular anger against neoliberal policies, immigrants, and minorities. Neoliberal order, as it fails, oscillated between right and centrist positions and failed to check the growth of far right. Now, the situation has worsened as there are signs of global right wing alliance, which is aggressive in its disdain for democratic norms. PM Modi's visit with Trump has two kinds of outcomes for us. First, we can examine what his visit signified back home before moving towards the implications at global level. While the visit was marked by grand displays of bonhomie between Modi and Trump, beneath the glittering optics of joint statements and celebratory events remain deep-seated issues that expose the exploitative nature of the current global order. While Modi and his supporters back home have dubbed the visit a great triumph, Trump's protectionist policies continue unabated. The Trump administration is trying to impose a series of tariffs and trade restrictions against India. These measures will harm Indian exports, particularly in sectors such as pharmaceuticals, textiles, and automobile parts. Further, Trump's attempts at concentrating manufacturing in the US will be detrimental to Indian manufacturing. Despite these overtly aggressive trade practices, Modi has refrained from taking a strong stance or even publicly addressing the issue. This is the outcome of reducing diplomacy to handshakes and hugs. One of the most glaring failures of Modi's visit was his complete silence on the appalling treatment of Indian deportees by US authorities. Under the Trump administration's immigration policies, hundreds of Indians, many of them skilled workers and asylum seekers, have been subjected to humiliating treatment. Trump's aggressive economic and foreign policies indicate a concerted effort to dismantle multilateral alliances like BRICS, which were conceived to stand up to US hegemony. Trump's administration is threatening this coalition through economic coercion and diplomatic maneuvering by forcing trade deals that isolate BRICS members, slapping sanctions on nations that challenge US economic supremacy, and tariffs as a weapon. Trump is attempting to push the world towards a unipolar order dominated by the US. While Modi and Trump's interactions may seem an exercise in diplomacy, they signal the growing consolidation of global right wing forces. India's unbeaten march, opposition set to raise US tariffs, voter rolls, delimitation, government focus on work bill. The second half of the parliament's budget session starting Monday. 16 days after tunnel collapse in Telangana, one body recovered. Man buried with excavator can faces endless fate for body death certificate. On Monday, Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman will table the budget for Manipur, which has been under president rule since February 13 after the resignation of Chief Minister N. Biren Singh. Union Home Minister Amit Shah is expected to move a statutory resolution seeking Parliament's approval for the proclamation of the president rule in the northeastern state. Fresh bout of violence in Manipur amid centre's bid to enforce free movement is likely to be flagged by opposition MPs. Congress has scheduled a meeting of its parliament strategy group on Monday. Sources said that while tariff offensive by the US will among the issues that the Congress and other India parties are going to raise strongly, the row against the deportation of illegal immigrants from the US in chains would also be rigged up by them. Congress has asked Prime Minister Modi to parliament into confidence on US President Donald Trump's statement that India has agreed to cut its tariffs way down as he repeated its claim that the latter charges America massive tariffs. Congress General Secretary in charge of Communications Jairam Ramesh asked the government Saturday whether the interests of Indian farmers and manufacturers are being compromised in the process. Delimitation storm is brewing in the south. An all-party meeting Stalin asked the center to extend 1971 census-based delimitation framework for another 30 years beyond 2026. TMC will highlight this issue of alleged duplicate EPIC electors' photo identity card numbers in different states. The party has rallied its India allies, including the Congress, to take on the BJP as well as the election commissioner over the matter. The epic row was first flagged by the TMC chief and the West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee at a recent conclave of a party in Kolkata. Within a week, on March 27, 2024, National Association of Software and Service Companies NASSCOM, India's largest tech industry lobby group, which was represented by tech companies like Meta, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, wrote to IT Ministry and made three demands: relax applicability norms to limit the scope of advisory, remove the contentious requirement for AI companies to seek government permission, and drop the need for companies to prepare an action taken status. The advisory was simultaneously facing backlash behind rollback of advisory on government norms for AI services. Agricultural Ministry seeks more funds for farmer registry digital crop survey. With the government aiming to create digital identities for 11 crore farmers by 2027. If it's wrong when they do it, it's wrong when we do it. Noam Chomsky. Mr. Trump can only do so much to bend reality. Administration failures, U-turns, and the cost of policies such as tariffs will probably temper voters' enthusiasm. Toll crosses thousand in Syria's communal clashes and interim leader calls for peace. Syrian leader Ahmad Shara called for peace on Sunday after hundreds were killed in some deadliest violence. The clashes, which a war monitoring group said had already killed 1,000 people, mostly civilians, continued for the fourth day in Assad's coastal heartland. Security source said the pace of fighting has slowed around the cities of Jabla Banias. Right groups say a commitment to traditional justice is crucial to preventing Syria from spiraling into a cycle of violence. Syrian authorities are due to announce a new government this month, which will scrutinize closely how representative it is of Syria's religious and ethnic diversity. Rebels led by Shara's Sunni Islamist Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group toppled Assad government in December. Assad fled to Russia, leaving behind some of his closest advisors. Assad overthrew ended decades of dynastic rule by his family marked by severe repression and devastating civil war. After months of relative calm following the ouster of Assad, violence spiraled this week as forces linked to new Islamist rulers began a crackdown on growing insurgency from Assad's Alawite sect on the Mediterranean. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a British-based watch monitor, said more than 1,000 people have been killed. 2 days of fighting, 745 were civilians. Germany's Merz SPD clear first hurdle in forming coalition. CDU leader Friedrich Merz with ally CSU leader Markus rescued from scam centers. Thousands are now trapped in detention at Myanmar border. Weak investor sentiment. Companies hold off IPO launches as secondary market slumps. India European Union FTA talks set to resume today amid Trump's tariff threats. FPIs pull out 24,000 crore from equities. Foreign investors continue to pull, withdrawing 24,000 in the first week of March. Total outflow by FPIs has reached 1.37 lakh crore in 2025 so far. 1.37 lakh crore. Around 80% of women-led business struggle with global payments. Zero tariff on US imports could boost India's electronic markets. India is the only country with a good relationship with Putin and Zelensky. If we need big weight, it is the first choice. When I released the book in Germany, I was often asked, isn't moving to India Isn't India moving towards dictatorships, or aren't human rights violated by religious fanatics? And doesn't the Prime Minister diminish the room for minorities? I tell everyone, why don't you hear both sides and see the difficulties which the country has? What are its challenges, and then make up your mind? I'm not saying it is a perfect democracy. We don't have a perfect democracy in US, Germany, India, anywhere. So don't preach. Take an objective view. We do it behind closed doors with the government and not with a megaphone preaching on how to run the country. Your meeting with RSS chief Mohan Bhagwat triggered criticism in Germany and India. What are your conversation about? What was your conversation about? What is your sense of the rise of Hindu nationalism? I have been in foreign service for 38 years, and if I go to a country, I have to talk to many sides. It is not in Chanakpuri where you find India, it's out there in Chandni Chowk or in Bhubaneswar or Lakshadweep. I come to a country where the negative German press has already called RSS a Nazi organization, and also said that I have come to a country where the PM and the half of the cabinet either are members or members of the RSS. Isn't it really a Nazi organization? I have to see it with my own eyes. I talk to many people, intellectuals and artists, BJP app in Congress, rickshaw pullers, and very rich people in the business sector. And the answer I got were diverse. Some were firm, supportive, some were critical. So I went to Nagpur to open a stretch of the metro which we financed. I said, let's get let's go to the headquarters and see what's the atmosphere. What would be the reaction if I asked these questions? I could ask any question there, including, is this a Nazi organization? As a German, I know what a Nazi organization is. The answers I got were satisfying to me in a way that at least I went out and said, I hope all the followers of RSS have such an opinion. I don't know whether it is a true answer or whether they knew what I wanted to hear, but I left the place not with horrific impression. I thought if these answers are the truth, there's something positive in it. There was no criticism in Germany, there was criticism in one sector of social media which tried to create a campaign. But if you're objective, it makes a lot of sense. Afterwards, there was other ambassadors who went to get their own impressions. In 1977, population of India was around half 600 million. The whole world had modernized during that time, but still in a country with 7,000 years of history, 40 years is nothing. What are key markers in India's development journey that West should learn? If you go to Varanasi, it is still the same Varanasi that you have had for thousands of years. So there are truths, rituals, spirituality, and characteristics of Indian mentality that was always there. That's why there has been a lot of change, but not too much change. Let's start with digitalization. You leapfrog telephone lines, end with everyone having a cell phone and doing financial transactions with it. In Germany and many European countries, we are still lagging behind, and you have done a great job in last 15 years. You're a globalized country with an Indian diaspora in almost every country of the world. You have a young population and are eager to advance, and this comes from many things, but also from the caste system. You have to be the best. It starts from kindergarten up to high school, because only this guarantees you out of the average. You will overtake Germany as the third biggest economy very soon, and you have this sense of achievement, which is something which has to do with being not being afraid of not being successful. If you have 10 startups and 8 are not successful, it maybe 2 are. So you fall down, you get up, and then this 8 time it's working. The rise of right is not only in Germany. Specifically, one could just say, "Don't worry, it's just 20%," and we will make sure that the democratic parties continue their rule. We just have to explain our politics better. If you dig deeper, it has to do with a few factors. One is the insecurity and uncertainty that this world brings. You have wars out there, economic decline because of steel and oil prices, and there all these factors which lead to job loss. There is digitalization, they take away our jobs. There is an influx of migration. We lose our jobs, but we take In so many migrants, in these times of uncertainty, one tends to lean on simple solutions and say this is black and white. Germany has seen a rise in Indian professionals in the last 5 years. Will the internal debate on migration hurt this upward trajectory? No, I don't think so, because people are aware that you have to differentiate. You have three different kinds of migrations. One is illegal migration, then there is legal through asylum seekers. We have a tough asylum law which grants people who are politically persecuted right to come. Then we have students, and then you have skilled workers. When we look for a win-win situation and look for nurses in Kerala, they come and find jobs in Germany, and we are happy that we have them because we need nurses in our hospitals. So of course, the right wing and others forget this differentiation and put everyone in bag. Just nonsense. There are a lot of Indians in Germany and they're happy. You have to find structures on how to shape migration by quota, otherwise, it is chaotic. Germany didn't want to talk too much about it. That's why the right wing parties come up. What is your take on Trump's administration's policies on mass deportations? If you are illegal migrant in Germany and committing crimes, then you have to go back. We have flights going back, let's say Afghanistan or Syria, whether you do it in a military plane or civil plane. This has to be done. With Trump, we have already seen he is postponing the taxes for the month and has got 10,000 soldiers of American army to protect the border against illegal immigration. I do not know whether this is the new style of radical announcement and then settling for less, or whether this is the new policy. Russia's Ukraine attack on Ukraine and how India's government reacted to it. Now that we are tackling completely new set of challenges, the war itself is not over. The Israel-Palestine conflict and now the Trump era. How do you see India's role? I was first one of the first to criticize Putin for this unacceptable breach of international law and lying to the international community. I had also heard different viewpoints. So it is your friend and it is also provider of weaponry and other things. And this gives me food for thought. What we in the West think that everyone should think about this war. It is not the case in India, as I found out later in Brazil and South Africa too. Now, for you, the Ukraine war is a European war. It's something close to our citizens. That's why we are engaged, and that's why we are against the brutal attack. But for someone who lives far away, it's a different point of view. Also, you're not member of NATO. You're not member of post-Cold War dealings. When the Berlin Wall came down, so I understand that this is far away from you. You have different historic relationship with the Russians, stemming from Nehru's times. The dependency on oil, repercussions of sanctions are felt in India because you would have to pay higher prices for oil. We have ours, and we should always try among friends to convince the other side, mainly because there is one point which might be convincing for the Indian interest. Is this breach of international law of some country invading the other country is acceptable internationally? Then what to do in the future if any of our neighbors do the same? Europeans are now taking India's perception into account a bit more, because many countries have been the G20 presidency of India, and a lot of international leaders talked about Ukraine with Modi. So now they are more aware of the India's position. One of the India's biggest strength is that it has not been a part of military bloc. It is a member of Quad, BRICS, G20 and UN. So it has its weight, and the weight doesn't come from the tanks. It comes from the politics sisters. It is the only country in the world with good relationship with Putin and Zelensky, with Netanyahu and Abbas and Palestinians, Kamala Harris, Biden and Trump. I'm not saying India is there to moderate, but if we are anywhere in the world in need of a big vote in a country, India is the first choice. European politicians should take India more into consideration for the solution of future problems in the world. We are becoming insular in India in terms of of ideas in the name of decolonization. Nothing is a one-way road. I wrote what the West should learn from India because that is what I can say. If I say what India should learn from Germany, I would say I would be very post-colonial. The book has been written by an Indian diplomat. There are, of course, things which you could learn. India is not punching above its back. If you go back in last 10 to 15 years, I wouldn't restrict it to the beginnings of Modi 1.0, but maybe even before that, during Indira Gandhi's time, when she made the Forum Non-Aligned Movement, she was following Castro. She moved India more into the perspective of global leaders. But since last 15 years, it is undeniable that India has moved up its visibility. It is debatable whether it's always the same person who shows up, because they made a lot of reforms in one Modi 1.0 which opened India for investors. Whatever the reasons are, in all these meetings, G7, G20, BRICS, Quad, which are American dominated, India is very active in these Bretton Woods institutions. So it is out and it is there. I don't understand estimate the photo ops, because they are just result of 2 hour talks before. So even if it is symbolic, then it shows that India is heard in all these places where you have meeting. Western dominated, Eastern dominated, India is there, and you will see when there are negotiations in Ukraine or even in the Middle East, India will be present. So there is a policy of securing India's interest. Any politician from the Congress would have to do the same, because you have already reached a state where you can't think of a world without India. That's all. See you in the next one.